Chapter 6. If he got out of this alive, Curb thought, that bull-air-used ship seller was going to pay through the Savile tube for sticking him with this piece of Garzenian junk. The little twart would be sorry his great-great-great-grandmother's egg had ever hatched. And then some. Well, yes, to be sure, Curb had been in a big hurry and had not really pursued his inspection. That was his fault, and true he hadn't had a lot of scratch to spend on a ship he planned to use for just the one round trip before he junked it. But even so, that did not excuse the bull air. He hadn't known that. He sighed. They must have seen him coming a parsec away. The cell had been criminal. The ship's warp engines were crap, the repellers were shot, the computer's viral matrices were scrambled, and the isonic dampers were disharmonic to the third damned power. All of which meant he was going to thump down on this dung ball of a planet at speed, way too fast, and if the status cocoon couch didn't work any better than the rest of the Zursucker of a ship, he was going to be splattered all over the countryside in a damp and lumpy chitinous sheet, and so much for his grand cosmic plan. Dammit. If he got out of this alive, he was definitely going to go back and grind that cellar into organic mush and feed him to himself. If he got out of it alive. The computer, whose sense of humor had apparently been corrupted, along with the viral molecular matrix that ran its box program, informed him that landing was imminent. Planetfall in 15 seconds, it said. Structural integrity of the outer hull is insufficient to withstand impact velocity. He. Damage estimate to vessel, approximately 78%, plus or 1 minus 1%. Ha. He. Curb told the computer to chase itself, an action unlikely save for very few races and none of them particularly bright. The computer thought this hilarious and laughed the final few seconds until the ship smashed into the ground hard enough to bury half its diameter and splash the earth up around it like liquid. Curb didn't see this, of course, because the status couch cocoon deployed, and it was his great and good fortune that it was the one piece of equipment that worked as designed. On impact, the couch formed a gelatinous shell around him that absorbed most of his interior, not incidentally making him blind, deaf, and otherwise insensate in the process. When the couch released him, a procedure something like a Kurt coughing up a particularly digested food ball to feed its young, it was obvious the idiot computer had been right about the hull's integrity. Not air wafted through great rents in the vessel. An atmosphere that was to him too cold, and too filled with alien stinks, vile enough to turn the stomach of a Povian carrion eater. Gah! Something jabbered at him in an alien tongue. Curb found his interneural universal translator button where it had fallen onto the couch and inserted it into his oral canal. The device picked up the alien language and converted it into omniversal in mid-sentence. Make one false move, and I'll blast your outer space ass to kingdom come. Curb shifted his position so he could see through one of the gaping holes in the ship's hull. Well, there it was. A human, or as they were known galactically, a Terry. They certainly were ugly, fleshy, stunted little bastards, pointing what was obviously a projectile weapon at the ship. They never learned, these inferior species. Curb said, "Put the gun down, stupid." His box translator, linked to the UT in his oral canal, transformed his command to place the projectile weapon upon the ground, less than optimal brained one. Well, that was close enough. The Terry skittered away for an instant, then edged back into view. It leveled the weapon at the ship again. "My name is Edgar Yax, and that's my pickup truck your damn spaceship just landed on and squashed. You owe me for it, pal. As for my gun, you can have that when you pry it from my cold, dead fingers." "There's a deal," Curb said to the Edgar. That came out as, "Your proposal is acceptable." Curb extended one of his cella and grabbed the Edgar by the head. The Edgar went, "Urk!" and fired his projectile weapon, but the blast was ill-aimed and did no harm, save possibly to bacterial passers-by in the air. Curb dragged the Edgar into the ruined ship, killed it by carefully crushing the crunchy skull with his pincher, then examined the corpse. It was so small, he would have to fold himself into end space to get it on, and even then it would be a struggle. And such flimsy integument, the skeleton was internal. What a stupid design. He'd have to spit coat the inside or it would rip like spiger lace in a stiff breeze. And even then, it would be an iffy proposition to move without tearing the damn thing every time he moved. Always something on these dead-end planets. He sighed. Well, one made do with what one had. The Edgar was one of the ruling species, and that was that. End of story. If he wanted to move around as one of them, he had to look like one of them. No point in putting it off. Curb folded himself into end space. Ow! That was always so painful, and began the most unpleasant process of shrugging himself into the former Edgar's integument. Another of the Edgar species, a female, stood in the entranceway to the artificial cave nearby. What did they call them here? Houses, it said. Call them here, houses. It said, "Edgar, everything all right? You look kind of piked." Might as well get used to the identity. From now on, Curb would think of himself as Edgar, at least as long as he wore the disguise. Edgar, Edgar, Edgar. All right, he had it now. Being folded into end space was not only painful and irritating, it also made him hungry. The ship's replicator hadn't worked worth done the last 4 cycles, and he was starving when he ate the remains of the Edgar. Now, after such a hasty meal, he was thirsty. He needed a nice drink. This female was obviously the property of the Edgar, so best he treated accordingly. The female said, "What was that?" Blowed up. "What was that?" Blowed up the truck. "Sugar," Edgar said. "Sugar? I never seen Sugar do that before." "Silence, you twit. Give me sugar now." The female made a gesture with its shoulders and went to a nearby box made of what appeared to be some organic woody plant carved and planed into flat sheets, opened a door, and removed a container. He could smell the sweetness in it. "Put it in water." The female obeyed, poured a small measure into a see-through container. "More," Edgar said. "Be not parsimonious." The female tipped more of the white granolas into the see-through container. Edgar grabbed it from her, downed it in one swallow. Ah, that hit the spot. He felt a warm glow suffuse him. Couple more of these, and he'd be ready to party. "Edgar, the skin on your neck is just kind of hanging there. Did you get burned out at the truck?" Edgar put the see-through container down on a platform and observed his reflection in the see-through substance that allowed observation of the outside from within the house. "What was that aperture called?" he queried his translator. "Window, right." The female was correct. The integument had slipped a bit. He grabbed the face of it, twisted it back into place, and tucked the excess down into the opening of the clothing covering the disguise. "Better?" he said. The female collapsed, apparently unconscious. How odd. Some kind of local ritual? Well, to business. A few more helpings of the sugar, and then back to the ship. He would have to move it, hide it somewhere, and repair it. Probably there was a nano fix-knit kit in the toolbox, so he could at least get the hull patched and some basic engine functions back online. Doubtful the ship would be able to go more than a few dozen light years with such spurger rigging, but that would probably be enough to get him somewhere. He could get a real vessel. He'd just have to limp along as best he could. Always something that went wrong, never failed. The gods of chaos must get bored easily to keep poking their pincers into his business, the way they kept doing. He went back to the ship, dug under the rear, being careful not to tear his new integument, and lifted the ship out of the crater. He dropped it on the ground. Oof! Not so much heavy as awkward. He looked around. No other houses nearby. That was fortunate. There were empty fields and patches of tall, woody, stalked plants, trees, the translator told him. Even some four-legged mammalian creatures here and there, but none of the human terrains about. Good. He briefly considered returning to the structure and eating the female, but decided against it. She looked stringy and tough, and he wasn't all that hungry anymore. He'd pick somebody up later. He shook his head, then began pushing the ship along the ground. It was awkward, slow work. It would be much easier if he could slip the disguise off and just carry the ship on his back, but that would mean unfolding and refolding himself, then stretching the disguise on again, a prospect he did not relish in the least. Better to do it this way than have to go through that again. Edgar sighed. It was always something.